Hello and welcome to the Faculty of Graduate Studies information session for master's applicants interested in the Tri-Council Doctoral Awards, or rather the Tri-Council Master's Awards and the Ontario Graduate Scholarship. My name is Narus, and I am a research officer with the Faculty of Graduate Studies. And today we'll begin with an overview of the different graduate funding opportunities at York, including the Tri-Council, Master's, and the Ontario Graduate Scholarship, as mentioned. And this is where we'll cover the master's application processes in the Tri-Agency portal. We'll also provide a summary of how to prepare a strong application with some practical tips for developing your proposal as well. And then we'll end with the Q&A period at the end to address any questions that have come throughout the session. Now to start, as many of you know, there are several avenues for graduate funding at York, and we'll start with an overview of the main categories that you see here. So there are internal awards. These include entrance scholarships, often awarded when you begin your program, and other donor-funded awards that recognize academic excellence. We also have bursaries, which are needs-based awards, and these are designed to support students who are facing financial challenges. And then we also have academic and research support funds, for example, the Academic Excellence Fund, and that can help students with any expenses related to conferences, fieldwork, or other research-related costs. And then there are external awards as well, and these include those major programs such as the federally funded Tri-Council scholarships and the provincially funded Ontario Graduate Scholarships, along with other external opportunities, and we'll jump into more detail about these a little bit later on. One thing to note is that most of these opportunities are geared towards full-time graduate students, so that's just something to keep in mind as you are searching and looking at the funding opportunities available at York. And then I do want to also highlight that our scholarships and awards page, which is pictured here, which is broken down into the different funding types. And one thing that I don't want to draw your attention to is the award search tool that you can see on the bottom of that screenshot. And that award search tool allows you to filter through and explore scholarships, awards, and funding based on different eligibility criteria. So that's a really helpful place to start if you're interested in finding out what is available at York for graduate students in terms of financial support. Now, internal awards are scholarships that are made possible by donors, and they come with different eligibility criteria. So these awards can be pan-university based, which means that they're open to all graduate students at York, or they can be program-based, which means that they're specific to your particular field of study. So when you are looking at internal awards, it's really important to review the award description, the eligibility, the scope, such as the research topic or the discipline, and whether financial need applies. To explore internal awards, I do encourage students to use the award search tool that I mentioned earlier. And again, that's just the best way to filter through and find awards that you might be specifically eligible for. And part of that award search tool is also a keyword search, which is also super helpful if you're looking to find opportunities that are based on your specific research project or discipline. And you can stay up to date on all of the upcoming deadlines and opportunities by subscribing to the Faculty of Graduate Studies newsletter. So that's one thing to do if you haven't done so already. And then one final tip as well, make sure that you're signed up for direct deposit. And this is just helpful in case you do win a scholarship or bursary or have refunds on your student account. This will allow you to have those funds directly deposited into your bank account rather than waiting for a check to come in the mail, which oftentimes takes a lot longer. Now, York also has bursaries available, and these funds are for students who demonstrate financial need. So students applying to bursaries or any internal awards must submit an application via the financial aid, awards, and scholarship system. And this is also referred to as FAS, F-A-A-S. Bursary applications for the fall generally open starting in the beginning of September. For winter, applications usually open starting January 2nd, so when we return back to campus after the break. And then for the summer term, May is when the bursaries generally open. One thing of note is that before you can proceed with applying for funding opportunities, such as bursaries or internal awards, you must first complete and submit a student profile and a needs assessment for the current study period in FAS. So once you have submitted your student profile, you'll be able to review and update and resubmit that profile as needed. And generally speaking, a new needs assessment is required for each application and study period. So for graduate students, you will want to update your student profile and your needs assessment with the relevant information every fall, winter, and summer in the FAST portal. And FGS also has other support funds available, which I mentioned earlier, such as the Academic Excellence Fund or the AEF. And this supports research activities, including conference supports, so to help cover travel if you're presenting at a research conference. It also can help support publications, so for instance, submission fees for academic publishing, and then other research expenses such as fieldwork, travel and accommodations, or materials needed to conduct your specific research project. Both part-time and full-time master's and PhD students are eligible to apply, and you can request up to $2,000 for expenses that are directly related to your own research and scholarship activities. And there's also $300 available for collective initiatives per academic year. And the two great things about the AEF is that one, you can submit an application either before or after expenses have been incurred, so you have a little bit of flexibility there. And two, there are three deadlines each year. So there's one deadline per term. So October 30th is the next deadline. February 28th is the winter deadline, and for summer, June 30th. And all of this information is available on the AEF website. So now we'll jump into an overview of the Tri-Council scholarships, which are among the most prestigious externally funded awards. These are collectively known as the Tri-Council Awards, which are, again, federally funded, also referred to as the Tri-Agencies, and they comprise of three agencies. So we have the CIHR, or the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. We have NSERC, or the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, and then we have SSHRC, or the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. And all three of the agencies, SSHRC, NSERC, and CIHR, use one shared application portal called the Research Portal for the master's level scholarship, so the CGRSM. And so if you are planning to apply to the master's level Tri-Council Awards, you'll submit just one application, and then within that application, you will select what agency you are submitting to, and that should be the agency that best fits your research area. To be eligible for the CGRSM, or the Canada Graduate Research Scholarship Masters, you have to be a Canadian citizen, permanent resident, or protected person. So you must be a domestic student in order to qualify. You must also have a first class average, so that is an A minus, in each of your last 2 years of full-time study. And you must be enrolled in or applying to a full-time research-based program that has a strong research component, such as a major research paper or a thesis. As of December 31st, 2025, you can also have no more than 12 months of full-time study completed in your intended master's program. So that's another eligibility criteria. And another few key points to just be aware of. You can only apply once per academic year to this particular scholarship, and you can only apply to one agency. And you also cannot have held a Tri-Council Master's Award before. And also, if you are awarded, these scholarships can only be held at an eligible Canadian institution. So you can't hold this award at a foreign university. So before you begin, we do ask that you double check and make sure that you meet all of these requirements. And we've shared a link on the bottom of the slide to those eligibility criteria on the program website, which provides a lot more detail in terms of what is required in order to apply. So to determine which agency you should be applying to, you will want to carefully review the subject matter eligibility details at the links provided. Now, this is especially important for any projects that involve health-based research. So, for instance, some research areas overlap with the mandates of both NSERC and CIHR, or with CIHR and SSHRC. So, you want to review and determine which agency your research fits with the best so that you don't disqualify yourself from the outset by selecting the wrong agency to submit your application to. And we have provided another link here, which also gives a little bit of additional sort of guidelines and instructions in that regard. If you are unsure about where your research fits, if it does sort of overlap with the mandates of the different agencies, the first step is to touch base with your supervisor if you have one so that they can direct you. If you're still unsure, you can always reach out directly to the agencies themselves. You can provide them with, a brief one-page summary of what your research is, and they can help guide you to submitting to the right agency. Now, in terms of the award itself, at the master's level, the Tri-Council Award is called the CGRSM. Again, that is the Canada Graduate Research Scholarship Masters. And these are valued at $27,000 a year for 3 terms. So it would cover a 1-year program, and these awards are non-renewable, meaning you can only hold this once in your lifetime. The deadline to apply for the CGRSM is December 1st, 2025 at 8 p.m., and you would apply via the ResearchNet portal. This deadline, the December 1st deadline, is applicable to all Canadian students who are applying to the scholarship, so please expect that there will be a high volume of activity on the research portal website. This can sometimes cause delays or technical issues, so we always encourage our students to submit well in advance of that deadline if possible. Typically, the results are announced directly in the research portal in spring of the following year, and that's usually around April 1st. So if you are applying to this December 1st deadline, you will be notified if you were successful the following spring. Now, when you are applying for the Tri-Agency CGRSM, your application is going to be evaluated on 3 key criteria. The first is academic excellence, which counts for 50% of the evaluation, and this includes things like your academic record, scholarships, and any awards that you've held in the past. The next criteria is research potential, which counts for 30% of the evaluation. So here, reviewers are looking at the quality and originality of your research contributions, as well as the significance, feasibility, and merit of your proposed research. And then finally, personal characteristics and interpersonal skills make up the remaining 20%. And this includes your work and leadership experiences, as well as your involvement in academic life, volunteer activities, and community outreach. And a full list of the different criteria are available on the agency's website, which we have also linked on the bottom of the slide. And we will be sharing these slides with you again after the session. Now, in terms of the actual application process itself, as mentioned earlier, there is one single online application for the CGRSM, and it's shared across all 3 agencies. So SSHRC, NSERC, and CIHR use the same portal for this particular scholarship. So regardless of which agency you're applying to, you're all going to be using the research portal to submit your applications. Now, what's involved in completing the application? Well, there are a couple of different components, and you can see them listed here on the screen. So there's the Canadian Common CV, or the CCV. So make sure that you're selecting the correct funding source and CV type, which will be the CGRS Masters template. And the CCV platform can take some time, so we do recommend that you start that portion of your application early. You're also required to scan and upload all undergraduate and graduate transcripts, including a transcript that reflects your current fall 2025 registration, even if your grades haven't been finalized yet. You will also be submitting a 1-page research proposal and a 1-page bibliography or works cited, if applicable. So for that particular section of your application, the page limits are the maximum. So for the research proposal, you can submit a maximum of 2 pages, So again, that's one page for the actual proposal itself and one page for any works cited or bibliography. 2 reference assessments are also required. So your referees will submit their assessments electronically through the research portal, so be sure to contact them well in advance. And then finally, in the application itself, when you're selecting your field of research, pay close attention because that is where you will be selecting the agency that your application will be submitted to. So again, that's either NSERC, CIHR, or SSHRC. Again, this is particularly important for those of you with health-related research. You want to read through the agency's subject matter eligibility to ensure that you are directing your application to the right agency. And again, if you are unsure, your supervisor, your program are really great resources, and you're also welcome to reach out to the agencies directly for additional guidance. Now, I do want to take a moment to highlight equity, diversity, and inclusion because this is a key focus in the Tri-Council competitions. So, as part of the application, you will be asked to complete a self-identification section, which details things like age, gender, Indigenous identity, disability, visible minority status, and so on. This section, the EDI questionnaire, is mandatory to complete, but for each question, there is an I prefer not to answer option. But regardless of what you select, you will have to complete that section of the application. And this section isn't just for data collection, it actually helps funding agencies identify gaps in participation and develop initiatives that work to promote equity. So, for example, there are specific funding opportunities and supplements for Indigenous applicants as well as Black scholars. So, to be considered for those particular initiatives, you must self-identify and consent to have your information used for funding consideration. So, the key takeaway here is that self-identification can directly impact your eligibility for additional opportunities and to help also ensure more equitable representation across Canada's research community. And another thing too is that funders aren't just looking at who you are as a researcher, they also want to know if diversity considerations are a part of your actual research design. So if you see that there is a section in the application asking about this, it's important to provide a clear response. So even if diversity isn't directly relevant to your study, you should briefly explain why. So for instance, within research design, there are different ways that you can account for diversity considerations in your project. Again, diversity can refer to things like age, disability, gender identity or expression, language, socioeconomic background, and so on. And some of the places that you can integrate these considerations and start thinking about diversity is in the research questions that you ask, in your study design, or in your theoretical framework, in the way that you might be collecting, analyzing, or interpreting your data, and also in how you're sharing and mobilizing your findings. So even though not every research project can or will be addressing diversity in a direct way, when it is possible, it can really deepen the rigor and relevance of your work and ultimately make it more impactful. So these are just some considerations to keep in mind. Now, I do also want to briefly highlight the supplements and joint initiatives that are available through the CGRSM program. So you will notice in the application portal that some agencies offer extra funding opportunities through joint initiatives. And these are essentially partnerships between the Tri-Council and other organizations that support research in specific priority areas. So for example, the Department of National Defense Mobilizing Insights in Defense and Security Mines Scholarship Initiative. So the Mines Scholarship, there are 2 separate options that are available. We have the Mines Master Scholarship for Indigenous students. That's valued at $17,000, $17,500 in addition to the CGRSM if you are eligible. And then the Mind Scholarship Initiative supplements, which is an additional $10,000 in addition to the CGRSM. Now, each of these initiatives does have their own eligibility criteria, so be sure to familiarize yourself with that before you start your application so that you can indicate whether or not you want to be considered and apply for those. You also have the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation Shirk Housing Research Scholarship, and this is worth $10,000 in addition to the CGRSM. There's also the Black Scholars Initiative, which we'll touch on soon, and then the Indigenous Scholars Award and Supplements Pilot Initiative, which we mentioned earlier. So again, each of these has its own value, duration, and eligibility criteria. The good news is that you don't need a separate application for these. You would apply directly through the main CGRSM portal. So for example, for the DND Mines and the CMHC housing initiatives, you can apply for these by selecting the initiatives from the Supplements and Joint Initiatives drop-down menu. This is only available to students who are applying to SSHRC, so the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. So if you have selected SSHRC as your field of research, then the DND Mines and the CMHC housing initiatives will pop up as an option for you to select from a dropdown. So you will need to include a justification statement for each of these if you are planning to apply, essentially explaining how your proposed research aligns with the initiative that you've selected. For the Indigenous Scholars Award and Supplements Pilot Initiative, as well as the Black Scholars Initiative, the process is the same. So you would select them from the drop-down menu, and both of these are available across all three agencies. And again, just a note, generally speaking, the Supplements and Joint Initiative sections of the application are all optional. So you should only be selecting them if both you and your research meet the criteria. And we've included a link at the bottom of the slide here with more detailed information on each initiative if you would like to explore them further. Now, just to delve into the Indigenous Scholars Award and Supplements Pilot Initiative a little bit further, so this provides additional support for Indigenous students who are pursuing master's level research through the CGRSM program. Again, for the application process, there is not a separate application. You just apply through the CGRSM portal. You would essentially just select that particular initiative from the drop-down in the Supplements and Joint Initiatives section or drop-down menu. In terms of the value, the Indigenous Scholars Award provides $27,000 for 12 months, and the supplement adds an additional $5,000. So applicants must self-identify as Indigenous, and for the purposes of the Tri-Council, Indigenous refers to First Nations, Inuit, and Métis, and then you must consent to use this information for funding consideration. So how it works is that if you are offered and you accept a CGRSM award, and if you're eligible, you may also receive the supplement in addition to your CGRSM. If your application is deemed meritorious, but you're not offered a CGRSM award, you may still be considered for both the Indigenous Supplement Award and Initiative, depending on available funding. So this particular initiative for the Indigenous scholars is offered across all three agencies. So whether you're applying for NSERC, SSHRC, and CIHR, if you meet the criteria and select this as an option in the drop-down menu in the competition cycle, you will be considered for it. As mentioned as well, the Tri-Council does have additional funds allocated to support meritorious Black scholars. So each agency has an additional 20 allocations per agency at the master's level for Black scholars. To be considered, you would submit your CGRSM application and you would, of course, complete the self-identification questionnaire. And applicants who self-identify as Black and provide their consent to be considered for funds targeted towards a specific group will be eligible. And I believe that there's also a drop-down menu where you can select the Black Scholars Initiative so that you can indicate that you would wish to be considered for it. Now, what you're seeing here is an overview of the master's level application process as shown in the research portal. And you'll see that a complete application includes the application form, attachments, a CCV, and 2 reference assessments, which must all be submitted directly through the portal. Now, also note that in order to submit a complete application, again, you do have to complete that mandatory EDI questionnaire that's highlighted in red at the top. There are, again, about 8 questions about age, gender, sexual orientation, Indigenous identity, And each of those questions has an I prefer not to answer option. So even if you select that you prefer not to answer for each of the questions, you still must complete that survey. It won't negatively affect your application in any way, but it's still required. Now, at the top, you'll see in this image here, um, you'll see funding opportunity listed as the Canada Graduate Scholarships Master's Program, and that just shows the competition that you're applying for. And you'll notice the different sections and modules that are part of the application. So what we'll do next is we're going to go through each of these modules and sections of the application to give you an idea of what's required and expected as part of the submission process. And here on the screen, you can see what the application looks like once you've logged in and created an application. And you can see the required sections here. So let's jump into it. So if this is your first time applying to the Tri-Council Master's Scholarship, the first step will be to create an account. To do so, you'll visit the research portal homepage, you'll click Create an Account, and then you'll get started. If you already have an account, you'll just log in using your existing credentials. Once you've logged in, you'll click Create Applications to gain access to the funding opportunities or the different programs that are available. And then the funding opportunities available on the research portal will show up in a drop-down. You'll find the row that says Canada Graduate Scholarship Master's Program, and then you'll select the Create button in the Action column, as you can see here. The page will refresh, and then a green message box is going to indicate that the application has been created and that a new application will be listed in the application section of the landing page. So you can see that here on the screen that you've started a CGRSM application. So you'll click Open to actually start populating and editing the application itself. Now, just a quick note that the research portal has a timeout period of 60 minutes of inactivity for each section. So after 60 minutes, you will be automatically logged out of the research portal. So typing doesn't count as an activity. So remember to save and validate each section that you change frequently. Otherwise, the information that you've entered will be lost. And you'll see what I'm referring to soon when we go into each section. So when you click into your application, you'll see a reminder in red that you must submit that EDI questionnaire that we talked about earlier. You have to complete this form. You can sort of see here the different questions that you will be asked to populate. Again, this data provides information on the diversity of the population that's applying for and receiving agency funds, and it just helps the government develop new initiatives to ensure greater EDI representation in research. So even if you don't want to specifically self-identify, you have the option to choose I prefer not to answer, but you still need to complete this as part of your application. And a note too that this self-identification information is not going to be shared with any external reviewers or anyone who's looking at your application. This is for SSHRC's internal purposes or the tri-agency's internal purposes only. Now, what we're looking at here is the identification module within the application. And this is where you're going to be including your application title, your field of research. So that is which agency you're going to be applying to. You're going to select your proposed host institutions. So for instance, if you're planning to apply to York University for your master's, you would indicate that here. And then also the department, as well as the proposed start date of your program and the total number of months of graduate studies that you have completed by the end of this year, so by December 31st, 2025. So for field of research, you're going to either select health, natural sciences and engineering, or social sciences and humanities. Each field of research is associated with a list of fields of study and a list of areas of research, as well as a list of institutions to which the application can be submitted. You can only make one selection for the field of research, and each is associated with one of the three tri-agencies. So SSHRC, NSERC, and CIHR. The proposed start date of the program of study, this is where you're going to be indicating the date you enrolled or expect to enroll in the master's program for which you are seeking support. And then you will also enter the number of months you will have completed in the eligible program of study as of December 31st of this year. So, for instance, if you haven't enrolled in a master's program yet and you haven't started, but you intend on hopefully starting a master's program next year in the fall, you're going to enter 0 for the number of months that you've been enrolled in the program of study. If you've just started your master's program this fall, you will have completed 4 months. So that's what you would enter here. So just make sure you're using the right calculation and the correct details in this section. Now, the identification section of the application is also where you're going to indicate if you want to be considered for additional programs, initiatives, or supplements, such as the Indigenous Scholars Award and Supplements Pilot Initiative that I mentioned earlier. And so here you will have to provide consent as part of that EDI questionnaire for your eligibility for these initiatives, so just keep that in mind. The identification module is also where you will select up to 3 universities where you would like to hold the award. So for each selection, you as the applicant must either be currently enrolled in an eligible program of study at the institution, or you must intend to apply for the full-time registration in an eligible program of study at the institution that you're listing. So each university makes its own CGRSM offers, and the award must be held at the university where the offer originates. So generally speaking, for the CGRSM, it is not transferable across institutions. So you want to be sure that you are indicating the institutions here in this section. Also, as part of the identification module under proposed host institution, one thing that I do want to quickly highlight is the faculty section. So where it says faculty, this refers to the faculty that houses your intended department. So for instance, the Faculty of Health, the Faculty of Engineering, the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies. What you don't want to list here is an actual faculty member, and we've seen that in the past. It's just incorrect. So don't list a particular person or faculty member. Instead, indicate the actual faculty. Also, as part of this section, we ask that you don't enter the Faculty of Graduate Studies here. Be as specific and accurate as possible. And this helps institutions to determine what program and committee should be reviewing your application during that institutional review process. The department section, that is where you're going to be entering your proposed department. So biology, law, political science, electrical engineering, essentially the program that you are intending to apply to or are currently registered in. One thing that I also want to highlight here is that your application won't be automatically sent to your current institution. So if you want the institution you're currently registered at, in this case, York, to receive your application, it must be selected as one of your proposed host institutions. The department at York that you select here on your application is the one that's going to be reviewing your application and determining whether or not to forward it to the university-wide Central Adjudication Committee. So if you are selected to receive a CGRSM, one thing is that you can take it up in a department at York that's different than the intended department that you've listed. So if in your application you've indicated that you are applying to York biology, but then later on, once you're actually enrolled, you've switched programs, you can do that, but the program in the other department must also meet the eligibility criteria. So it must also be a research-based program, and you must still be conducting research in that tri-agency field that you selected in your application. So for instance, if you submitted your initial application to CIHR because you were studying a health-related topic within the biology department, If you switch to a different department, as long as it's still within, health-related research, still within the mandate of CIHR, you can still hold your award. So the program has to fall within the mandate of the agency that you were awarded under. If you were awarded CIHR award for the CGRSM, but then you switch programs into a SHRC-related program, that's not something that can be accommodated. And again, this particular award, the Tri-Council Masters Award, is not transferable between institutions. It's only transferable between departments within an institution, so long as it's within the same umbrella mandate of the agency that you originally submitted your application to. Now, what you see here is a summary of proposal. This section of the application is where you're going to summarize your research project in plain lay language that's easy for the general public to understand. And you'll have 1,800 characters to do so. So there's a limit here in terms of the characters that you can use to describe your research proposal. So think of this almost as an abstract of sorts. If your application is successful, then this particular summary might be made publicly available. And as part of this summary of proposal, citations and references aren't needed and they shouldn't be included in this section. Again, you have a very limited amount of space to describe your project in an accessible way, so you shouldn't be including citations here. Now, the activity details model is where you're going to be providing additional information about your project. Note that the section highlighted in red at the top, which includes themes and CIHR pin, will only appear for those of you who select health as your field of research earlier on in your application. So if you selected health as your field of research, meaning that you are submitting your application to the CIHR, under themes here, you're going to make a selection from the following list. There's going to be a drop down where you select either biomedical, clinical, health system services, or social, cultural, environmental, and population health. So essentially, CIHR is asking you to select a general description of where your research falls under. And then you'll also have to provide your CIHR PIN. And for this section of the application is also where you're going to be specifying whether your research project involves human participants, animals, or Indigenous peoples. So indicating whether any additional ethics certifications might be required for your project. I want to say here, you're not actually required to have your ethics approval or to upload any ethics certificates or protocols as part of the application. What this section is for is because the agency just wants to know and see that your proposal and your application are aligned and that you've considered ethical considerations that are needed to complete your proposed research project. So if you know that your research involves human participants and you've mentioned this in your proposal, you want this section to also indicate that. So you want there to be some alignment between your uploaded materials. You'll also see that there are 2 questions about sex and gender-based analysis. You must provide a response. If you select yes to either question, you'll be prompted to describe how sex and/or gender considerations will be considered in your research proposal. A text box will appear and you'll have 1,400 characters to answer. Reviewers will expect to see an explanation in this box and will also expect to see gender and/or sex considerations being addressed within your outline of proposed research, so in your actual research proposal. If you indicate no to both questions, but your outline or your research proposal suggests that your research might actually involve sex or gender considerations, that omission might negatively affect the assessment of your application because reviewers may see your application as being completed incorrectly. So regardless of your answer, your response here will be visible to reviewers. In this section as well, you'll also be asked to list up to 10 keywords. These are free form responses, so you'll just type in up to 10 keywords that describe your project. And then you'll also be asked to rank up to 3 primary fields of study, and these options come down in a drop-down list that you'll be able to select from. The special circumstances section is also an important one if it applies to you. This is an optional section. So this is where applicants can explain any factors that might have impacted your academic record or your research progress. So, for instance, if there are any relevant circumstances that might have affected your research, such as maternity or parental leave, illness, disability, family responsibilities, and so on, this is where you can include an explanation, and you have a 5,000 character limit maximum to do so. So you can select yes or no here. You still have to provide a response, either yes or no, but if you select yes, then a text box will appear for you to provide your response. Again, providing a response for special circumstances is optional. So if you don't have um, anything, any special circumstances that you want to speak to, you can just select no. In the attachment section, you'll need to upload key documents. So we have the outline of proposed research. This is essentially your research proposal. You have a maximum of 1 page to describe your objectives, your hypothesis, your approach, including any relevant literature and methods. And then you also have an additional page for your bibliography and citations. So this section allows for a total of a 2 page attachment, 1 page for your proposal, 1 page for your bibliography. There's also a section to upload your transcripts as an attachment. So you must upload official transcripts from all previous and current post-secondary institutions, and they should be merged into one PDF file. So please keep that in mind. You can't upload more than one attachment per section. Everything must be combined into one PDF file and then uploaded. Now, I mentioned this very briefly earlier. The CGRSM application also requires applicants to complete the Canadian Common CV, or the CCV. This is a mandatory component. So your CCV outlines your academic and research background, any awards, publications, and relevant experiences that you have. So when you go to the Canadian Common CV website, you must select the CGRS Masters from the funding source and the CV type drop-down menu. And then a complete CCV must be linked to your application by following the instructions that are provided on the bottom. We have a link here on the bottom of the screen that has all of the instructions for linking and completing the Canadian Common CV to your CGRSM application. So again, just to note, the Canadian Common CV portion of your application is completed outside of the research portal. Once you complete your CV and submit, you'll receive a confirmation number. That confirmation number is what you're going to be copy and pasting into your CGRSM application. And there's a section for that. And the agencies have provided really detailed instructions on how to do this. Again, it's linked here on the bottom of the slide, and we've shared these slides with you earlier via email, and we'll also share them with you afterwards. Lastly, in the invitations module, you'll need to invite 2 individuals who are familiar with your research to provide references. So what you're going to do is enter their email addresses, and then they will receive instructions to submit their letters directly to the portal. Be sure to ask for these letters well in advance and set an earlier deadline than the final application date of December 1st. So this ensures that your application is not delayed because you won't actually be able to submit your full CGRSM application unless both references have been received in the portal. And again, we've provided a link to the instructions for completing the reference assessment form at the bottom of the slide, and you can share these instructions with your referees. And you can see here as well that there's a place for you to indicate when you would like your referees to submit their letters. So again, enter a date that's earlier than your actual December 1st deadline. So you can set an earlier deadline for them and just let them know. Now, as you enter any new information in any section of the application, you will need to save and validate. So a green check mark is going to appear when each section has been saved and validated, and when each reference assessment has been received. Once everything is fully completed in the application portal, including the references, you must preview your entire application by clicking the Export Application and Attachments to PDF button. And we've highlighted that or circled it in red for you here so you can see what we're referring to. This step is mandatory. So what it does is it allows you to review all of the sections of your application except for your CCV and reference assessments, which won't appear in the extracted application. Once you have clicked Export Application and Attachments to PDF, the Submit button will finally appear. So if you miss this step, the Submit button won't appear. So just keep that in mind. You need to complete this step in order to actually submit your application for consideration. To help you navigate the application process, we've compiled a few of the key resources here that you will want to bookmark. So first, you can visit the Faculty of Graduate Studies page for an overview of the CGRSM application. This page will provide York-specific information, including deadlines, to help guide you through our internal processes. Next is the official Tri-Council program page for the Master's Award. This will be your go-to source for the most up-to-date information on the scholarship, including eligibility criteria. We've also linked the application instructions here as well, including the instructions on how to complete the CCV. And then we've also linked a tutorial video. This video has been provided by one of the agencies, NSERC, for the Natural Sciences and Engineering. And this walks you through the portal just as we did, so it can serve as a refresher for you whether or not you're applying to NSERC. Because the research portal is hosted on the NSERC website, NSERC has provided the tutorial, but again, whether you're submitting your application to SSHRC or CIHR, you can use this particular video guide as a refresher for when you are submitting. If there's something in that tutorial video that doesn't match what you're seeing in the portal, please refer to the actual application instructions. The video might be slightly outdated in terms of the funding amount or the program name, but the general instructions for navigating the research portal application is the same. Again, when in doubt, defer to the linked application instructions that are provided here. And again, just to reiterate, for those of you who will be choosing health as your field of research, specifically under CIHR, it's important to note that you will need to provide your CIHR personal identification number as part of your application. It's your responsibility to ensure that you allow enough time to obtain your CIHR PIN before the application deadline. This is critical. It can take up to 1 full working day to process your CIHR PIN request, so be sure to do so as early as possible. Plan ahead. Make sure that you submit your PIN request early to avoid any last-minute issues that could delay your application. And you'll see here that we've provided a link to the instructions on how to obtain your PIN for your CIHR CGRSM application. Now, some general tips to ensure that you have a smooth application process. First and foremost, prepare your applications early. Start now if you haven't done so already. You don't want to wait until the last minute. You want to give yourself enough time to gather all of the necessary documents and to also refine your application. When it comes to the Canadian Common CV, make sure that you upload it to your application in the research portal by entering the confirmation number that you receive after you have completed it. This step is crucial and it's required in order to submit your actual application. Next, order your transcripts early. Be sure to include official, up-to-date transcripts from all of your undergraduate and graduate studies. That includes your fall 2025 term. So, as students who are registered at York, your York transcript should show your fall 2025 registration status. Don't forget to also remind your referees to submit their assessments ahead of the deadline. You won't be able to actually submit your application without the completed reference assessments. So please keep that communication with your referees open and follow up if you need to. Also remember to save and validate your application in the research portal frequently. If you don't, you risk losing the information that you've already entered. Also look for the green check mark that indicates each completed section has been saved and validated, and ensure that those reference assessments have also been received. For the CCV, after completing each section, be sure to click Done. This is essential to do for every section in order to save the information that you've entered. And those are the general tips that we just suggest. Again, by following these tips, hopefully you'll be well on your way to submitting a strong application by December 1st. I know it seems like it's a little bit early. You still have over a month to complete your application, but my recommendation, or what I say, is that it's never too early to get started, especially because late applications will not be accepted. So just keep that in mind. If you don't submit by the 8 p.m. December 1st deadline, your application will not be accepted. There's no way for us to accept that for you because the portal is externally hosted by the tri-agencies. So they set the deadline. All right, so now that we've covered the Tri-Council, we're going to move on to the Ontario Graduate Scholarship and the QE2 or the Queen Elizabeth II Scholarship in Science and Technology very briefly. So this is another avenue of funding at the provincial level. It's open to both full-time master's and PhD students in all disciplines of academic study. These are also merit-based scholarships, but they're jointly funded by the province of Ontario and the school that's offering the award. And for both the QE2 and the OGS, the value and the duration are the same. If you are successful, you'll be awarded $15,000 for 1 year, and this is non-renewable, meaning that you would have to reapply each year that you're eligible. And you must also hold the award for at least 2 consecutive terms during your graduate degree, or up to 3 terms total if you are successful. So the OGS would cover a 1 year sort of duration of your program or of your studies. In terms of eligibility for the OGS and the Queen Elizabeth II graduate scholarships, again, the OGS is open to both domestic and international students across all academic disciplines, but the QE2 is only available for domestic students and for only those domestic students who are studying in the science and technology programs. At York, both scholarships, so both the OGS and the QE2, are adjudicated together through a single application process. So if you're applying for OGS and you're eligible for QE2, you're automatically considered for the QE2. The application process, the components are all the same. In terms of eligibility, a minimum GPA of A- is required in each of the last 2 years of full-time study. You must be enrolled full-time in an eligible graduate program. And again, just to highlight the key differences, the OGS welcomes international students from all disciplines, while the QE2 is restricted to domestic students in the science and technology programs. But for both awards, they carry the same level of value and prestige. In terms of the deadlines for the OGS at the master's level, they're anchored to the same study level and research areas as the tri-agency competition. So for master's students this year, the deadline is also December 1st, so it's the same deadline as the CGRSM. Now, you will be happy to hear that at York, the application process for the OGS and Tri-Council are combined. So if you're applying for a Tri-Council Master Scholarship, so the CGRSM, and you want to also be considered for the OGS, you only need to submit one main application, and that is your Tri-Council application that we just reviewed. Your Tri-Council CGRSM application is going to be used to consider you for both competitions. So very generally, very briefly, the step-by-step process is this. So first, you will submit your CGRSM Tri-Council application through the research portal by the December 1st deadline. Then you'll log into York's financial aid, awards, and scholarship system, the FAST portal, and you'll complete two condensed applications or cover sheets, one for the Tri-Council, one for the OGS. You don't need to upload your full application documents again in the FAST portal because we at FGS will have direct access to your Tri-Council submission and your reference letters through the CGRSM portal. So completing the FAST condensed application is mainly for administrative purposes to help us track and link your applications to your student record and to also help us to facilitate payments afterwards if you're successful in the competition. For more detailed guidance, we have actually posted a FAST application instruction guide on our OGS awards page, and we've also linked it for you here on the bottom of the slide. I know this sounds a little bit confusing. I promise it's a lot simpler than it seems. And again, if you have questions, we're happy to address those. If for some reason you are not applying to the Tri-Council Awards and you're applying to OGS only, the submission process is a little bit different. So for those of you applying to OGS only, you will complete and submit your full OGS application through York's FAST portal. So in the system, you'll log into FAST using your York credentials. You will select OGS, and then you will simply follow the prompts step by step. So for the OGS only application, it's a really good idea to prepare all of your required application components ahead of time and then submit everything online once you're ready. So you'll need to include transcript for all undergraduate and graduate institutions that you've attended. You must also arrange for two referees who will be submitting their letters of reference directly in the FAST portal. Remember, since again, you're applying to OGS only, not Tri-Council, all of the application components and references will occur in the FAST system. And the full OGS application includes what you see here on the slide. So you'll need a research proposal or your plan of study, a bibliography or works cited. There's a section for you to describe your professional experiences, your academic background, your credentials, and your research contributions. And then there's a section for you to upload your transcripts. And then there's also a section for you to invite two referees to submit their letters online. Again, we do have the instructional guide on our OGS awards page to help you navigate the FAST portal in terms of what sections need to be completed for your OGS only applications. And I believe we've linked that here on the bottom of the slide as well. Now, you've heard me mention transcripts a couple of times. For all of these scholarship applications, especially the Tri-Council and OGS, you will need to submit your official transcripts from all of your undergraduate and graduate institutions that you've attended. And students are responsible for obtaining these and submitting these as part of the application. So again, because you're applying through York, your York transcript must show your fall 2025 registration, even if you don't have any grades yet. This just serves to confirm your enrollment and registration status. And you can order your York transcripts directly from the registrar's office. And we do urge students to order these as early as possible, just to account for the processing times and the fact that many other students are requesting their transcripts at the exact same time. So you just want to avoid delays where possible. I also want to briefly address the importance of reference letters. So these letters are a really critical part of your application. Reviewers want to see others vouching for your research and for your research potential. So reach out to your referees early, ideally at least 3 weeks before the deadline, hopefully more, just to give them enough time to prepare. So one of the reasons we advise students to reach out early is because without the required reference letters, you won't actually be able to submit your full scholarship application. So if your referees are late, they haven't actually hit submit, they haven't finished their letters, you won't actually be able to submit your application for consideration. Remember as well that your referees won't automatically receive your full application. They won't have access to your research proposal, your CV, and so on. So you will want to share a copy of these and anything else that might be relevant to them so that they can write a strong and tailored letter for you. It's also really helpful to point them to the awards evaluation criteria so that they can highlight how you meet those expectations. And again, just like you, they need time to write these letters. They're oftentimes writing letters for more than one student, so give them enough time by setting an internal deadline to make sure that you're able to submit everything on time. And then you can also share some helpful guides directly with your referees when you're reaching out to them. So we have our FGS guide on how to prepare a strong letter of support, as well as the agency's instructions for referees. Okay, so in the next few slides, we're going to give a brief overview of what it takes to develop a strong and successful scholarship application. This is just a quick primer, and it's just to highlight some key features that can help your application stand out. The focus will be on your actual research proposal. Keep in mind that this is just general advice. It's tailored to a more general application, so nothing I say here is mandatory. Just think of it as guidance to help you shape your strongest possible application. Again, keep in mind that you will want to tailor it to your particular work or your particular discipline. So when it comes to scholarship applications generally, you've heard me say this already, give yourself plenty of time. It's not something that you want to rush, so plan ahead. Start by figuring out exactly what's required for a complete application. Check what documents you need. So for example, transcripts, referees, and get those lined up early. Review the evaluation criteria carefully. These are posted on the funding agency's website and on York University's website as well. We follow the same process as the agencies. Once you know what's needed, then you can begin developing your key documents. So your research proposal, your contributions, your applicant statements when those are required, and of course, you'll want to complete the actual online application form thoroughly. Remember too that oftentimes your first draft, especially of your proposal, is not going to be your final one. So expect that you're going to be revising and editing multiple times to polish your application. So that's why we always recommend that before submitting, make sure you get some feedback if you can. Ask your supervisor. If you have strong relationships with other faculty members or professors, ask them if they might be able to review your research statement or your research proposal. Also ask your peers to review your materials. So again, one of the things to keep in mind is that as part of the application process, after you submit, your application is going to be reviewed twice. So your program first reviews the applications, and then strong applications are forwarded to an institutional pan-university-wide committee at York. This committee is comprised of academics from various disciplines. So your application needs to be clear and it needs to be accessible beyond your immediate research area or research discipline. So for this reason, it's helpful to have people outside of your program or outside of your discipline, such as, postdocs that you know, or senior lab members that you might be familiar with, or even friends in other fields or programs to read your application to make sure that they understand it. And just to make sure generally that someone outside of your field with only an undergraduate background can understand your project. Aside from starting early, again, what we want you to do is take your time when you are processing all of these or developing your application components. Generally, each scholarship competition has slightly different submission requirements. So if you are applying to multiple awards this fall, be sure to verify exactly what each award or scholarship requires. We've already gone through that for the OGS and the Tri-Council, but just generally speaking, a major award application will typically require a research statement that's either between 1 or 2 pages, a 1 page of bibliographies or citations, at least 2 reference letters, transcripts from all of your completed undergraduate and graduate programs, and then details about your education, your research contributions, and any relevant experiences that you might have. So usually they ask for something that's similar to a CV or a resume. And then again, your research proposal. We've talked about this a couple of times, or your research statement. So your goal for your research proposal is to describe your project in a way that's clear, that's engaging, and easy to understand, even for someone outside of your specific field. As mentioned earlier, these scholarship applications are typically reviewed by multidisciplinary committees, so faculty from many different areas. This means that your proposal needs to avoid jargon and it needs to avoid overly technical language. So focus on explaining why your research matters. So one of the things that you sort of want to address in your proposal is what difference is your project going to make? What are the broader impacts or significance of your work? So think about the bigger picture, how your findings might affect society, how they might advance knowledge or solve important problems. Your application should also make a strong case for what your research is doing, how is it important, and why is it worth funding. So essentially, your research proposal really stands to advocate for your project. So be clear about its potential impact and relevance, and do so using language that is understandable and again avoids overly technical jargon. In terms of the structure of your research statement itself, a well-organized statement typically includes these key parts, not always in this order. Again, it depends on your specific discipline itself, but generally speaking, you'll first start with an introduction and a background. So just a short paragraph that situates your project within a topic that has broad interest. So a strong introduction is critical. Reviewers are often reading hundreds of proposals, so you want to help orient them quickly and clearly to your project. Early on, you also want to clearly state your research questions. These should be specific and easy to understand. And then you'll also want to provide a literature review or a background section. And this is where you're going to be referencing the most important and seminal works in your field. And this serves to show that you know your area well. And it also helps to place your project in context for reviewers who might not be specialists. The other thing that it helps to do when you are talking about this literature review and background is that it serves to couch your project within the existing body of research, which then allows you to underscore why your specific project is important or original or different. Then you want to include your objectives or your justification, basically why your research question or your topic matters. And then as part of the research proposal, we do urge students to consider using headings or subheadings just to help orient your reviewers. So research questions, objectives, methodologies, these aren't mandatory, but they do help to improve the readability of your proposal and help to guide reviewers through your actual proposal itself. Next, you'll want to clearly explain your methodology, how you plan on answering your research question. So keep this section concise, but keep it convincing. Reviewers want to see that your project is feasible and realistic within the time frame of your degree. So your methods should directly address your research question, and if relevant, it should also connect to a theoretical framework or hypothesis, depending on your particular discipline. And then finally, the end of your research proposal should wrap up with the contributions and conclusions. So explain why your research matters, who will benefit, what will change, and why your project is important to pursue. So in other words, what your research proposal should answer is the what, the where, the why, the how, and the so what of your project. Now, one of the questions that we get most often from students is, well, what if my plans change? If your research project changes by the time that you receive the award, don't worry, because most of these scholarship agencies and funders understand that even expect that your plan is going to evolve as you continue on with your degree. So at the time of your application, when you are preparing your documents and getting ready to submit, just present your research proposal as a snapshot of your current plan as clearly as possible. If you are offered a CGRSM, you aren't required to pursue the exact same project that you were described in your application. So if your project changes, that's totally okay, but you have to make sure that the subject matter still falls within the same field of research that you selected in your application, such as, health research, social sciences, or natural sciences. So if your project changes, it's no problem as long as it still fits within the agency mandate that awarded you the scholarship. Now, to end this portion of the presentation, we've provided some resources that you might find useful, and I believe we provided some of these earlier on, but just for your reference, we have a guide for developing successful grant proposals that FGS has put together, and it walks you through sort of how to write a strong proposal and application more generally. There's a section, a YouTube video actually on how to make your application stand out. This is provided by NSERC, so that's also a very helpful tool. And then we've also provided a Why You Learn self-paced course that focuses on guided self-reflection with the goal of building internal tools and skills needed to engage in meaningful decolonizing, equity, and inclusion work, so DEDI. And that's just a really good foundation to help you start thinking about these things as part of your research and scholarship applications. Now, if you have any specific questions about these scholarships or awards, or if you think of a question about this presentation later on, you're more than welcome to reach out to our team. Frank, Tiana, Ricolette, and I work together to facilitate external awards and scholarship applications. So where we're able to help, we'll definitely do so. So please reach out. Your graduate program is also a really great resource to you, and they're usually your first point of contact for assistance, and they'll be able to answer any questions that you have that are specific to your discipline or your program. Before we wrap up, don't forget that you can stay connected with FGS on social media, and this is the easiest way to catch important deadlines and events. So you can follow us using the handles listed here on various social media platforms.